The woman who was buried alive, SHAKEREH KHALEELI. There are some true crime cases that feel evil. And then there are cases that feel personal. Because the worst part isn't always the violence. Sometimes it's the betrayal. Imagine this. You are asleep in your own home. In the same house where you raised your children. The same house where you trusted the man sleeping beside you. You drink tea. You start feeling dizzy, heavy. Your body slowly shuts down. And when you finally wake up, you can't move. It's dark. There's wood above your face, barely any air. Your hands are clawing at the walls. You scream, but nobody can hear you. And the person who put you there is your husband. Today we're talking about the case of SHAKEREH KHALEELI, a wealthy socialite from one of India's most elite families. A woman who seemed to have everything. Beauty, money, influence, status. And yet somehow she ended up becoming the victim of one of the most horrifying murders in Indian history. A case so disturbing that the judge called it the rarest of the rare. But what makes this story terrifying isn't just the crime itself. It's the psychology behind it. Because this wasn't a crime of rage. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't messy. This was patience, manipulation, control. And honestly, I think what people miss about this case is how easily manipulation can disguise itself as comfort, especially when someone enters your life exactly when you feel lonely. So let's get into it. SHAKEREH KHALEELI was born on August 20th, 1947 in Madras, India. And from the very beginning, she lived a life most people could only imagine. Her family was incredibly wealthy. Not just rich, old money rich. Political connections, nobility, influence. Her grandfather had been the Diwan of Mysore, which, in simple terms, meant her family belonged to one of the most respected aristocratic circles in India. She grew up moving between countries because her parents were business people. At one point, the family even lived in Singapore. So SHAKEREH grew up sophisticated, well-spoken, international, elegant. People who knew her described her as graceful and intelligent, the type of woman who naturally drew attention when she entered a room. And in 1965, at only 18 years old, she married Akbar Mirza Khalili. Now, Akbar was also extremely accomplished. He was athletic, intelligent, respected, and eventually became an Indian diplomat. From the outside, they looked perfect. Wealthy couple. High society. Beautiful family. 4 daughters. International lifestyle. The kind of marriage people envy from a distance. But one thing I've noticed with cases involving elite families is this. People confuse appearances with happiness. Just because a family looks polished doesn't mean they're emotionally fulfilled. And apparently behind the scenes, cracks had already started forming. There were rumors that SHAKEREH desperately wanted a son. Something that became emotionally painful over time. Now, whether that alone destroyed the marriage, we don't know. But after nearly 20 years together, SHAKEREH shocked everyone. She asked for a divorce. And honestly, for a woman from her social background in the 1980s, that was a massive deal. Divorce already carried stigma. But divorce among elite social circles? People talked. And only 6 months later, she remarried. That man was Swami Shraddhanand, also known as Murali Manohar Mishra. And this is where the story starts becoming dangerous. Because Swami was basically the complete opposite of her first husband. No elite background, no diplomatic career, no polished reputation. He had dropped out of school, run away from home, claimed to possess spiritual powers. He reinvented himself as some kind of spiritual advisor. And if I'm being honest, this is where I think people underestimate manipulation. Manipulators rarely arrive looking evil. They arrive looking helpful. They study your emotional gaps. And then they become whatever fills them. Before they became romantically involved, Swami first entered SHAKEREH's life through business. She had returned to Bangalore to focus on real estate and family assets. And because Swami had experience managing properties, he became one of her advisors. At first, it seemed harmless. He listened. He gave advice. He made himself useful. And timing matters. Because during this period, her first husband was often away. She was emotionally vulnerable, lonely, trying to rebuild herself after divorce. And then came the emotional hook. One day, SHAKEREH reportedly confided in him that she had always wanted a son. Swami responded by saying he had spiritual powers, that he could help her have a child. Now, logically, that sounds absurd. But emotional vulnerability changes how people process reality, especially when someone tells you exactly what you want to hear. That's something I think true crime repeatedly teaches us. People don't fall for manipulation because they're stupid. They fall for it because manipulators identify emotional needs first. And eventually, SHAKEREH trusted him completely. In April 1986, despite opposition from her family and daughters, she married him. And once that happened, Swami gained access to everything. Her home, her finances, her business, her properties, her trust. That trust would eventually become the weapon used against her. Now, among SHAKEREH's daughters, she was especially close to her second daughter, Sabah. Sabah constantly kept in touch with her mother, sometimes several times a day. So when suddenly, in May 1991, SHAKEREH stopped answering calls. Sabah immediately sensed something was wrong. At first, Swami gave excuses. She's out. She's busy. She's resting. Then the stories became stranger. He claimed SHAKEREH had tax issues. Then he said she was hiding. Then he claimed she had gone to New York to give birth. Which already sounds bizarre. Because imagine your mother supposedly being pregnant, and nobody in the family knows. And even stranger, her husband wasn't with her. Sabah became suspicious. So she contacted people in New York and checked the hospital Swami mentioned. No patient named SHAKEREH existed. When confronted, Swami changed the story again. Now she was supposedly in London, because apparently she wanted to be alone. And this right here is one of the biggest red flags in manipulation cases. Constantly changing narratives. Manipulators often believe confidence matters more than consistency. They assume if they keep speaking calmly enough, people will eventually stop questioning them. But Sabah didn't stop. And honestly, if it wasn't for her persistence, this case might never have been solved. Because years passed. Years. And SHAKEREH was still missing. No confirmed sightings. No phone calls. No evidence she had left the country. Yet somehow Swami continued living normally. using her money, managing her properties, staying in luxury hotels, spending freely, which already tells you something psychologically disturbing. He wasn't panicking. He genuinely believed he had gotten away with it. In 1992, Sabah discovered something that changed everything. She found her mother's passport inside Swami's hotel room. That moment destroyed his entire story. Because if SHAKEREH's passport was still in India, then she never went to London, never went to New York, never left. Sabah immediately pushed the police harder, but the investigation moved frustratingly slow, partly because there was very little physical evidence, and partly because Swami was incredibly convincing. And honestly, this is another uncomfortable truth. Society often gives manipulative, charismatic men way more benefit of the doubt than they deserve, especially when they present themselves as calm, spiritual, intelligent, or respectable. But eventually, pressure from the family and media became impossible to ignore. In 1994, police formed a special investigation team. They interviewed staff members, tracked financial records, monitored Swami's behavior, and one detail stood out. A domestic helper revealed that Swami had forbidden anyone from entering a specific area in the backyard. Immediately, investigators became suspicious. Why protect one random patch of land so intensely? And then finally, Swami confessed. On March 28, 1994, he admitted that he had killed his wife. But what he described next horrified the entire country. He said that on April 28, 1991, he drugged SHAKEREH's tea with sleeping pills. After she lost consciousness, he placed her inside a wooden box. Not a temporary container, not something improvised. A custom-made box with wheels. Then he nailed it shut and buried it in the backyard, alive. That part never stops being horrifying, because this wasn't an explosion of anger. This required preparation, measurement, planning, construction. That means at some point, he literally designed a coffin for his own wife, and then calmly executed the plan. 2 days later, police excavated the backyard. Underneath a concrete slab and a tulsi plant, they found the box, exactly where he said it would be. When investigators opened it, they discovered SHAKEREH's decomposed body inside. But the detail that haunted investigators the most came during forensic analysis, because evidence suggested she woke up. Her hands were gripping the mattress tightly. There were scratch marks everywhere inside the coffin, thousands of fingernail marks, meaning she regained consciousness underground. Imagine that realization. Waking up in complete darkness, unable to breathe, no room to move. Realizing the person you trusted most had buried you alive. Honestly, I think this is one of the most psychologically terrifying aspects of the case. Not just death, but betrayal during your final moments. And meanwhile, while her body was literally buried beneath their property, Swami had already started taking over her entire financial life. He forged documents, transferred assets, sold land, withdrew huge amounts of money. At one point, he was staying in luxury hotels and partying while pretending his wife had simply disappeared. And this is why prosecutors believed the motive was financial greed. But personally, I think it was also about power. Because some people don't just want money. They want ownership over another person, their identity, their future, their voice. And when that control is threatened, things become dangerous. The trial became one of the most sensational legal cases in India. People were horrified, not just because of the brutality, but because of the intimacy of the crime. This wasn't a stranger attack. This was a husband exploiting absolute trust. Prosecutors presented overwhelming circumstantial evidence. The sedatives, the forged signatures, the financial transactions, the custom-made coffin, the backyard burial. And honestly, the coffin itself became symbolic because it showed intention. This wasn't panic. It wasn't an accident. It was calculated. Swami's defense tried to create doubt. No eyewitnesses. No CCTV. No fingerprints proving the burial. At one point, he even claimed SHAKEREH died naturally and he secretly buried her because he feared scandal. Which is honestly absurd. Because normal people do not secretly bury their spouse in the backyard under concrete. But what's fascinating psychologically is how often killers still try to maintain control of the narrative, even after being exposed. It's almost like they believe reality itself can be manipulated. In 2000, the court convicted Swami. The judge described the case as the rarest of the rare and sentenced him to death. Later, the Supreme Court reduced the punishment to life imprisonment without parole. Some people felt angry about that. They believed execution was justified. But regardless of where people stand on capital punishment, the reality remains the same. Swami would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And honestly, compared to what SHAKEREH experienced underground in that coffin, prison probably sounds merciful. What makes this case stay with people decades later isn't just the cruelty. It's the emotional manipulation. Because SHAKEREH wasn't naive. She wasn't unintelligent. She was educated, wealthy, experienced, respected. And still, she became vulnerable to someone who knew exactly how to position himself. I think that's what people miss. Manipulation doesn't always target weakness. Sometimes it targets loneliness, hope, dreams, the need to feel understood. And another thing that haunts me about this case is how long it took before people fully realized something terrible had happened. Because when someone slowly isolates you from your support system, confusion replaces urgency. Excuses replace alarms. And by the time the truth surfaces, it's often already too late. Also, I can't stop thinking about Saba. Because if she had accepted his explanations, if she had stopped asking questions, if she had ignored her instincts, SHAKEREH's body might never have been found. That persistence mattered. And honestly, that's another lesson from this story. Sometimes intuition exists for a reason. When stories stop making sense. When explanations constantly change. When somebody keeps redirecting instead of answering directly. Pay attention. Because the truth usually leaks through inconsistency first. And maybe the most disturbing part of all this is imagining those final moments. A woman who trusted her husband enough to hand him her future, her finances, her home, her life, only to wake up underground, alone, fighting for air. That level of betrayal is difficult to even process. And yet somehow, it really happened. So yeah, that was the case of SHAKEREH KHALEELI, one of the most horrifying true crime cases in India's history.